It was a few minutes past 3:00 p.m. at the downtown hospital. The corridor outside the emergency ward, typically a hive of activity at that hour, was unusually quiet. The only sounds were the muted footsteps of nurses gliding from room to room, the soft, methodical beeping of medical monitors, and the faint, steady buzz of overhead fluorescent lights. The air felt still, calm, almost sterile. Everything seemed normal, until a sharp gasp pierced the silence at the front entrance. A security guard froze mid-step, eyes locked on the automatic sliding doors as they opened with a soft whoosh. What he saw made the blood drain from his face. For a heartbeat, the entire hallway seemed suspended in stillness. A little black girl, barefoot and alone, stepped hesitantly into the corridor. She couldn't have been older than 6. Her tiny body trembled with each step, the way a leaf quivers on a winter branch. She wore a pale pink dress, delicate in design, but clinging to her body in a way that was deeply unnatural. The fabric was stretched tightly across her midsection, bulging over a stomach that looked alarmingly swollen, even grotesque in its distortion. The dress, worn thin and frayed at the seams, did little to conceal the pain etched into her posture. Her arms were wrapped protectively around her belly, as if shielding it, or perhaps bracing against something shifting inside. Her lips trembled as she fought back tears, and her wide, frightened eyes flicked anxiously from face to face, silently pleading for something, anything. From behind the front desk, a young nurse sprang to her feet. Her heart skipped. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" she called, already hurrying around the counter, her voice gentle but urgent. The girl didn't answer. She took 2 more faltering steps, then stopped. Her breathing grew ragged. Her small fingers dug into the fabric of her dress, clutching tightly at the stretched cotton like she was trying to hold herself together. Her gaze dropped to the floor. Her knees wobbled. Something was wrong inside her. Then she made a sound, a whimper, soft, barely audible, but filled with such raw, pitiful pain that it echoed down the corridor like a siren. Everyone who heard it felt the same thing, a chill, deep and immediate. The kind that wraps around your spine when you know, instinctively, that what you're witnessing is not just an emergency, it's something worse, something no one was prepared for. Dr. Helen Marshall, a seasoned pediatric specialist, had just exited a patient's room when the ripple of commotion drew her attention. At first, she registered only movement, a nurse hurrying, a guard standing strangely still, but then she saw her, a barefoot little girl in a tattered pink dress, standing alone, trembling. Helen's instincts kicked in before thought could. She moved swiftly, cutting through the gathering tension like a blade through gauze. Just as she reached the child, the girl's knees buckled. Helen lunged forward, catching her mere inches from the ground. She gasped the moment her hands touched the girl's abdomen. Helen knew this wasn't normal. The child's belly was swollen, but not in the way of a typical distension or bloating. It was unnaturally rigid, packed to the point of near bursting. Not soft like pregnancy, not fluid like infection. It felt wrong, dense, artificial. "Oh my God," Helen whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of what her hands were telling her. The girl's small hands clutched the lapels of Helen's white coat, gripping it as if it were the only solid thing in her world. Her eyes, brimming with tears, locked onto Helen's face. Her voice emerged in a trembling whisper. 3 words that turned the blood in Helen's veins to ice. "It's still moving." Helen blinked, thrown off balance by the phrase. "What?" she asked softly, gently. The girl repeated it, even quieter now, but unmistakably clear. "It's still moving, inside me." For a moment, the world held its breath. Helen stared into the girl's eyes. There was no confusion, no fevered hallucination, just raw, suffocating panic. This wasn't a child misunderstanding her body. This wasn't fantasy. She was describing something real. Helen stood upright with sudden purpose. Her voice rang out across the ward, sharp and commanding, completely unlike the calm, collected doctor everyone knew. "Call 911, now." A nurse behind the front desk froze, eyes wide with confusion. "Dr. Marshall, but we are the hospital." "I know," Helen snapped without missing a beat. "Call anyway. This isn't just a medical emergency, it's criminal." That shattered the stillness like a dropped glass. Instantly, the ER shifted into high gear. A nurse sprinted toward the trauma bay. Another bolted for a gurney. Phones rang. Alerts were triggered. Yet Helen stayed crouched beside the girl, her focus unshakable. She gently guided the child to the floor, trying to ease her down. But the moment the girl's back touched the ground, she arched in agony. A cry ripped from her throat, high, animal, unbearable. Her belly twitched again. Inside her, something shifted, something alive, or trying to be. Helen's heart pounded. "What's your name?" she asked, urgently but softly. "Where's your mom, your dad?" The child shook her head, her lips trembled. I don't know," she whispered. "They told me not to talk." Her voice cracked and dissolved into a helpless sob. Helen felt her hands shaking, not from panic, but fury. This child hadn't just been abandoned, she had been used, violated in a way that no human being, especially not one so young, should ever endure, and she had carried that weight, silently, until her small body could bear it no longer. Until she walked into a hospital on her own, until she said the words that would shatter every assumption in the room. The nurse returned with the gurney, and together they lifted the girl onto it as gently as possible. They wheeled her down the hall, the crowd parting in silence, eyes wide in confusion and alarm. Inside the trauma room, controlled chaos took over. IVs were inserted, vitals monitored, and an ultrasound machine was quickly rolled to the bedside. Helen stayed close, gripping the girl's hand. "You're safe now, sweetheart," she whispered. "I promise." But even as she said it, she knew the truth. Safety was still far away. Then the scan began. What appeared on the screen made everyone in the room freeze. It wasn't a baby. It wasn't a tumor. It was a mass of foreign cylindrical objects, dozens of them, packed impossibly tight between her organs. The shapes were cold and inhuman. They weren't in her stomach or intestines. They hadn't been swallowed. They had been surgically implanted. Helen felt her stomach turn. She took a step back and reached for the landline on the wall. 911. "What's your emergency?" She didn't hesitate. "This is Dr. Helen Marshall of St. Jude's Hospital. We have a 6-year-old girl. We believe she has been surgically implanted with drug capsules. I need police and federal child protection on site." Immediately, the trauma room went silent, not with calm, but with tension. The ultrasound screen still glowed, casting eerie light across the girl's limp body. Each shape inside her abdomen looked alien, wrong, wrapped in plastic or latex. Some twitched slightly as the machine passed over them, causing one of the nurses to flinch. "She's got at least 30, whispered a resident. Helen's face had gone pale, maybe more. The girl was barely conscious now, sedated. Her body was slipping into shock, her fever rising, her blood pressure dangerously low. Every second increased the risk of rupture. If even one capsule burst, she wouldn't survive. "We're taking her to surgery now," Helen said firmly, turning to the anesthesiologist. "Get her under. Calm, steady. We cannot risk any sudden movement." And with that, they rushed into the operating room, knowing they weren't just fighting to save a life, but uncovering something far darker than anyone had expected to walk through those hospital doors. Inside the operating theater, urgency crackled in the air. Every member of the surgical team scrubbed in with an intensity born not just of routine, but of fear. One life hung in the balance, a very small, very fragile life. The little black girl lay motionless beneath the bright overhead lights. Her belly was grotesquely swollen, a cruel distortion of her tiny frame. The ventilator kept her breathing in rhythmic hisses, for lines fed medication into her delicate arms. Her heart monitor beeped erratically, reminding everyone of the razor's edge they were walking. Dr. Helen Marshall stood at the table, eyes steady, soul storming. She drew a breath, nodded to her team. "Scalpel." The first incision was clean, but what lay beneath was not. As Helen worked methodically through layers of tissue, the full horror began to reveal itself. Audible gasps broke the surgical silence. The capsules were everywhere. Each one was about 2 inches long, tightly wrapped in stretched latex-like material, sealed at the ends. They weren't just hidden. They'd been deliberately placed between organs, strategically nestled to avoid detection by airport scanners, smuggling dogs, X-rays. Whoever had done this was meticulous, calculating, and inhuman. One capsule had pressed dangerously against her intestine, nearly tearing it. Another had become lodged behind her liver. "She could have died in her sleep," murmured a nurse, her voice shaky. Helen didn't respond. She was already extracting the first capsule, her gloved hands working delicately. the contents inside, likely heroin, maybe fentanyl, were dense and dangerously compacted. This wasn't just drug trafficking. This was child abuse on a level most couldn't fathom. One by one, they removed the foreign bodies. Trays were brought in, soon lined with evidence of the unimaginable. 20, then 30, then 40. Helen worked tirelessly. Her back ached, her forehead beaded with sweat, but she didn't stop. 47, 48, 49. Finally, she whispered the count. 52. She stood over the table, her hands trembling. Someone cut this child open, she said, barely audible, filled her body like a container, and left her here. The room was silent. No one could speak. No one could make sense of what they'd seen. They began closing the incision, irrigating with care, treating the bruising and inflammation that marked where the capsules had pressed against her insides. Her vitals were holding, but barely. She was stable, for now. Helen's voice broke the silence. She has no ID, no guardian, no school records, no birth certificate under the name she gave. She's a ghost, the anesthesiologist said quietly. Helen looked down at the girl's peaceful face. No, she said softly, she's not a ghost, she's a survivor. Hours later, in recovery, the girl stirred, her eyelids fluttered, then opened. She looked around weakly. Machines beeped in steady rhythm now. Her breathing was calm. The fever had broken. Helen was by her side, holding her hand. You're safe now, she whispered. The girl blinked slowly. Is it gone? Helen nodded, eyes stinging. It's all gone. You were so brave. A tear slipped down the girl's cheek. I didn't know what it was, she whispered. They said I'd get candy. Then I woke up and it hurt. They said if I talked, I'd disappear. Helen clenched her fist behind her clipboard. Her voice was gentle, but her soul burned. Who gave you the candy? The girl hesitated. A man, bald, big glasses. He brought me to a building with a lot of trucks. Then he left. Helen's breath caught. The second time the girl had mentioned trucks, cargo, smugglers. This wasn't just one act of cruelty. This was an organized trafficking route. They had used this child to carry narcotics across borders, confident no one would search her, confident no one would hear her, confident she would never speak. But they hadn't counted on her walking into a hospital herself, on her whispering 3 words that saved her life. By sunrise, the story had broken. News outlets carried the headline, 6-year-old girl found with 52 drug capsules implanted in her abdomen. Major trafficking ring under investigation. No photo was released, no name was shared, but Helen made sure her voice was heard. In a tearful press briefing, she spoke to the public. She didn't run from danger, she ran toward help, and for the first time in her life, someone listened. The capsules were turned over to federal agents. Surveillance footage was analyzed. The man with glasses, the truck depot, leads emerged. A manhunt was launched, but the most important fact remained. The girl was alive, and no longer alone. That night, Helen returned to her bedside. The child was sleeping, peaceful. For once, her small chest rose and fell in quiet rhythm. Helen whispered, I'm so sorry they used you, but I swear, no one will ever use you again. She glanced at the chart at the foot of the bed. Jane Doe. Helen frowned. That name didn't suit her, not anymore. She deserved something better, something truer, something earned. Helen softly whispered the name she had already chosen in her heart, Hope, because despite everything that had been forced inside her, what came out was the courage to speak, the strength to survive, and the spark of a future no one could take away.